Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. For today's project we're going to do a nice simple polymer clay cane, and I'm calling this one Crystal Blend Heart Pendant Tutorial. It's always difficult to come up with names for canes, but it's quite handy if you do have a name because people then know what to refer to it as. And when this one, particularly in the blue one here, it sort of looked like these are sort of shards of crystal sort of going up out of a midpoint, sort of making them look almost three-dimensional. And of course I am using little crystals, little Diamante pieces in the actual heart pendant, so I thought it was as good a name as any. There's lots of different varieties of colour you can use this with this one, and I'll show you some of those later on in the tutorial. And as always, follow the instructions or go slightly off-piste and come up with your own designs if you would rather. Whatever you're going to do with this one, I'm sure it will turn out beautifully. It gives a nice consistent design through one simple skinner blend and then just adding a few extra lines. And one of the things I'm going to show you today is how to inset a bail in the back so you get that nice hanging position on the finished pendant, and it's one that's useful in lots of different pendants in polymer clay. So we'll start off by going through the equipment we need and then go from there. The equipment we need today includes a polymer clay blade. I often refer to these as tissue blades, a craft knife, a polymer clay roller. This is just a small 1/2 inch, 1.25 centimetre one. I'm using a couple of cable needles. These are just to smooth the clay together to create nice even seams, and I'm also using a smaller one just to create the wire bail in the back. This one's a 4mm, this one's a 3mm. Cocktail stick. Cutters. Now if you want to create the heart pendant, then you'll need a heart cutter. I've used all three of these in the different colourways that I'm going to show you later on, and I've also got a little one here to create a little bit where the Diamante is going to go. Because the ones I'm using today, a couple of them have got, they're sort of sharp both sides, I just use a piece of hardboard to press down on to protect my hands. When I'm reducing the cane and getting the size, I do that on a measuring sheet. This one is freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net, and I've laminated it so I can work on it many times, and I use the 4 squares to 1 inch, but you can also get a centimetre sheet if you prefer. To create just a slight round to the outside of our piece, you can use a bowl. I'm just using these as stainless steel ones available from Ikea. Any bowl that will go in the oven will work, just to give you a slight curve on your piece, and obviously use the outer side for the first bake and the inside of the bowl for the second bake. We use a little bit of liquid polymer clay. I've just decanted some into a bottle here for ease of use. If you don't have it, then you can use PVA glue instead for putting the 2 layers of clay together. And then to create a bit of texture on the back of our piece, I've just used a bit of, this is actually just sponge packing wrap. You can sometimes get them if they're the bottom of a salad drawer, that sort of stuff works well as well. But this just came, it was packaging, and I just cut myself several pieces, and it gives a nice soft texture. When we're putting the veneer together, I will use a polymer clay blade, which is an old blunt one that I've covered with some masking tape down the side, so that when I use this side of it to push the slices together, I'm in no danger of cutting my fingers with the sharp side of the blade. I'll also, when I'm making the veneer, just use a little bit of cling film or plastic wrap, big enough to take the size of my cutter, to give it a nice beveled edge. To create the bail on the back of our piece, I'm just using a piece of wire. This is 0.6mm in size, and it's about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres long, and I've also got some jewellery pliers just to bend it round, but you don't really need these if you've got your piece cut to the right size. To make sure I've got the finding nice and level before I bake it, I just use a piece of odd chain, an ordinary piece of string, cotton thread, just something that will fit through the piece so you can hold it up to test with first. Works really well for that. I'm adding little Diamante crystals into my piece. Now these are sort of AB backed ones. Originally when I bought them I thought they were 2mm, but they're definitely not 2mm, they're more like 1mm. However, they have been useful for lots of projects, and you can buy them relatively cheaply online. Just look for the pointed backed crystals. When you're using something this small, then having one of these stick up pencils makes a huge difference, because with these you can just pick up your little crystals on the end of them and fit them in to wherever you want them to go. I will be adding my Diamante crystals after I've baked, so I'll be using a 2-part epoxy glue. However, you can add them, as I mentioned when we go through the whole process, before you bake if you've got slightly different crystals, but mine don't work, and I explain why later on. You can of course also use flat-backed ones, but again these would be added after baking, and you just add a little bit of glue and stick them on afterwards. I use a large tile to work on, a smaller tile to bake on, and when I bake I always tent my piece in aluminium foil to prevent it burning should the oven spike whilst baking. But on this time we need to be particularly careful not to get it touching the clay at all, particularly if you've got it on the outside of a round bowl, so I'll get a nice clean new piece and make sure it's surrounding the clay but not actually physically touching the clay. And other than that, I will be using biodegradable wet wipes and tissues to clean my hands and equipment as I go along, and a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. So let's go through the clay we need for today. Very simple amounts and very simple colours. For today's project I'm using FIMO Soft, but all recognised brands of polymer clay will work well for this technique. I'm using plum, raspberry, lavender, white and peppermint with a bit of white there. And for the amounts I'm using, I've got 1 ounce or 28 grams of the plum, but this is going to be not just part of the Skinner blend, but also the extra lines we add in and the background colour of our finished piece. So because of that, I'm going to split it into a 1/2 ounce or 14 gram amount, and then 2 lots of 1/4 ounce or 7 grams. And one of these will go over here to add into our 5-way Skinner blend. So all of these then are 7 grams, so 7 grams, as I say, of the plum, the raspberry, the lavender and the white. And then I wanted a slightly lighter shade than the peppermint, so I've gone for 1/2 peppermint and 1/2 white, so 3.5 grams or 1/8 of an ounce of each of these. And when those two are pushed together and conditioned together, they will form a brand new, slightly lighter and softer peppermint shade for adding in to the Skinner blend. So I'll get all of those clays conditioned thoroughly, and I'll condition them using my pasta machine. If you're not sure about conditioning clay, I do have a video with a few tips and techniques on how to do this, and I'll put a link to that in the description below this one. I will put them all through on a sheet on setting number 3 when they have been finished conditioning, and on my pasta machine 0 is thick and 9 is thin. So I'll bring you back when I've got all 5 of these done, that colour's nicely mixed up, and we'll start by doing a Skinner blend with those 5 colours. We'll start by making a Skinner blend between these 5 colours. So I've got the peppermint, the white, the lavender, the raspberry and the plum. And rather than doing the normal diagonal cuts we're going to do on a Skinner blend, I'm just going to overlap them slightly because I want to have a smoothish blend, but I want to definitely see each of these colours. So I've conditioned them all, as we said, on setting number 3 in medium setting of my pasta machine, and I've put them into very rough oblong shapes. It really doesn't matter if they're completely neat. If you want to be neat, then obviously feel as though you do that if you want to. So I'm just overlapping them slightly. So I'm just going to fold them in half as I would normally do for a Skinner blend, and then we're going to put it through the pasta machine, fold first, and each time I put it through I'm going to collect it at the bottom and refold it. After I've put it through about 5 or 6 times, it'll start to even out and we'll see the slight blending in between, and then we're just going to do one thing just to get a smoother blend between those. So I'll put it through 5 times first and bring you back when I have done that. So there we go, and you can see there we've got very definite stripes of the different colours. Now that would normally happen anyway in a Skinner blend where you get different stripes, but I want to make the blend where it goes from each of these colours into the next one just slightly more blurred. So just once, rather than folding it up so that they match each time, I'm going to fold it up and very gently skew it. So I am on purpose pulling it slightly across. So can you see where it's now got that slight overlap on all of the colours? So now when we keep putting it through, folding bottom to top, but keeping the edges together, we will get a really nice soft blend from one colour all the way through to the other. If you find it's not working, then after a few more turns, just skew it slightly a little bit more. As I said, I'm still looking to have a little bit of each of the colours showing slightly in the effect that we are going for today. So there we go, we have our nice blend with all the colours going through from one bit to another. I could have carried on going longer than that so I get even more blends between these, but I'm quite happy with how that has gone. And you are looking to end up, if possible, with again a very roughly rectangular or oblong piece. If you're unsure how to get this nice sort of fairly regular oblong shape, or if you're not sure about skinner blends at all, I do have a video tutorial which gives some tips and techniques on how to achieve these results, and I'll put a link to that in the description below the video. So having put that through, and I did of course put that through, I don't think I mentioned it at the time, I did put it through on one thicker setting of my pasta machine, so setting number 2. I will make sure I put a note along the top of the video to mention that I put it through on setting number 2. So I've got quite a nice thick sheet there. So I could either chop it in two, or you can fold it in two, whichever you feel most comfortable with. And then having got that in two, I'm just going to fold it. I'm going to press down the fold to make sure there's no air trapped. And I'm going to put it through the darkest side first, that way on, in setting number 2 still, till I get a longer, thinner piece. When you put a fold in your piece rather than cutting it in two, you'll quite often get a piece that bends round. So if that's happened, that's absolutely fine. All you do is effectively straighten it with your hand. Having got a long piece, I now want to get the longest, thinnest piece I can. So I'm going to put mine down onto my thinnest setting, which on my machine is number 9. But either go straight down to your thinnest setting if you know it's not going to tear or shred the clay, or if you do have a problem with your machine, just go down one setting at a time until you get to your thinnest usable setting. And again, I'm going to put through dark end first. And don't forget, when you change settings from a large setting to a very thin setting, just turn the handle a couple of times so that any clay that's clogged underneath will come out and not get stuck onto your nice pristine clay. So there we go, our nice long thin strip. I'm going to concertina this, doesn't matter which end you start, but it is quite important about the size we're going to do. So I'm going to concertina this so it's about 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch wide. You don't want to have a wide concertina for this technique. If you have a very wide piece, you're not going to get the same effect. So if you can, do it about this width. And obviously if you were using less clay, then you would make a smaller one. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go backwards and forwards. I'm folding it as I go, making sure there's no air trapped. And I just work back from one end to the other. Once you've finished, we do want to get this quite neat, and as you can see, mine's misshapen. Yours might be perfect, in which case leave it, but if it's like mine, then first of all I will put it flat on my tile and sort of push the purple end down to make it flat there. Do the same the other side, and then just spend a bit of time with my fingers, just pressing it till I've got a nice even oblong shape. So the proportions we want to finish up with are probably about 1/3 as wide as it is long, and probably half as wide as it is high. Again, it doesn't matter completely, so don't be too precise about it, but just as a general rule, and you'll see why as we go through the next stage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this evenly in half down its length. Now if you're unsure whether you're going to be neat, you can of course always mark the sides with your blade first, and then that gives you a point to start with, and then very gently seesaw down and sort of go slowly and look down the side to make sure you're cutting it in that nice line as you go down. It doesn't have to be completely neat. You can see mine's gone skew-if there at the bottom, that's fine. If it's completely skew-if, where you start at this side and sort of go off down to there, just push the two back together and redo it. There's no problem in that at all. So I'm going to put one piece on one side, keep one piece at the moment, and go to the larger amount of the plum colour that you had left. So this piece I've also conditioned, and I've put this through on a thinner setting once it was conditioned on the pasta machine. So this one's gone through on a thin to medium setting, so setting number 5 on my pasta machine. And all I'm going to do is lay that piece on. I'm not pressing it down because I'm going to remove the purple piece in a minute. I'm just using this as a size. And whatever size your piece is, cut a piece of plum the same size. Then take that piece, put it just along the bottom, and then wrap it up, folding it over the inside. Having got that done, take your other piece and turn it upside down and put it back along the length. Take a little piece of your leftover purple, so I'm using the cut off pieces. We're going to take one more flat sheet, so leave yourself a big enough sheet to do something with that, and then just take these pieces, and I'm looking to make a long log or sausage, and it wants to be about 1/4 of the width of the top of your piece here. Again, just roughly, don't have to be exact, but just roughly. We are going to do another roll later on, so don't worry if you've picked up too much, it'll just save you time later on. So, something about that sort of size. I'll pinch off the end, and that just sits on top. And all we're going to do now is we are going to pull these two sides up to create a point, and that log of purple clay is going to be the top of our point. And I find it easier to do on the tile, so I'm making a point with my fingers and pressing down, and we're going to turn this oblong into a triangular shape. Now you'll notice whenever I do this, I put my fingers on the end as I'm going towards, and that's so that I can keep the ends from splaying out too much. Then I'm going to turn it on its side, so that's a corner, this is going to be a corner, and this is going to be a corner. And because this is quite short at the moment, I'm going to actually push it back up this way, because what I'm looking to make is a triangle that's roughly even. So an equilateral triangle where all three sides are roughly the same. Okay, so something a bit more like that. When you've done that, we're just going to chop through the piece down the middle. You can either do it by eye or use your measuring sheet. And you can see this is getting on towards about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres wide. Take your two pieces, take one of them, and whichever is the longer side, so that's one of my longer sides, again you're going to cut a sheet the same size as your piece. And this time, look where that extra piece was that you added last time, so it went along the bottom there, didn't go along the blue. So with the blue towards the middle, I'm going to put this piece up the inside, but with a piece left over. And then I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to match it to that side and push both sides together. So you've got that sort of effect. And then the little bit that's sticking out, I'm just going to fold over the edge and effectively roll that into a little sort of round bit on the end there. Okay, so what we're going to do now, our piece is virtually ready just to manipulate. I'm going to change the shape, and this is where we're going to put sort of some of the curls in and those little extra bits that create the different shape in our finished pattern. And I'm going to do this by either using my finger, or you can use a roller, and I'm just going to push my finger in there and I'm going to press this clay. I'm creating a curve in here. And at the same time, if you notice, I'm sort of also pushing down here. It's as much because you're keeping your hand on it to keep it in place, but if that curls in, that's absolutely fine, and that's the look we're going for. So I'm looking for quite a big sort of round area that's going in this one. And then when you've got it going, you can actually pinch across the end to make it nice and thin. And then again, we are simply going to roll this piece over and roll it in, and we're going to pull the whole of this side round until this bit meets this little added bit we've got in here. And you're really sort of going to have to press around, and pressing around is what creates more of a curve in this piece and creates that nice inner curved bit we've got in the finished pattern, and just keep pressing it round until it meets up. Don't worry if this bit goes slightly wider, that's completely normal, and that's what happens. I must admit, when I look at this one, I do sort of quite think it looks like a nice butterfly or fairy wing as well. So if you fancy doing something like that, you can obviously keep it at this stage and not do any more. So we've now got our shape. We're starting to get a nice curve on it, but of course it's no longer a triangle, and we want to force it back into a triangular shape. So I'm going to force a corner into this side. Lay it flat on the ground or your tile, push that slightly in, and just by reinforcing with your fingers this point and this point, you will automatically force this bit up into a point where it would naturally go. Rotate your piece and do the same as if it was already a triangle, and completely naturally, as I say, you will start to get a point of your triangle. I'm just going to do that a little bit more, just to make sure the shape's nice and even. And then the last thing we're going to do, because we've got a nice sort of curve, as you can see on this piece now, we want a slight curve on this piece as well, and we're going to do that by doing exactly the same. And again, put your finger or your roller, I'll do it with the roller this time to show you with the roller, you can just press in, and I'm curving this piece round. I'm doing it fairly forcefully. To start with, you need to sort of push it quite a bit to get that curve in. So I do just find it easiest doing it with my finger. And this time, once we've got the curve in, and we've got a nice point on it, exactly the same as we did last time, remember that extra little bit of roll we had? So if you haven't got one, then use the leftover bits of clay to do it. And about the same size as we put along the top of our piece there, just pop that in and fold it over. Now this time I want to fold it over, but if possible, I want to leave a little bit of the blue still showing. So I'm going to do quite a tight curl on that one. And then as before, we've no longer got a point here and a point here, so I'm going to force that into a point and then turning it on its side, keep pressing down until I end up with a point. And that is effectively our cane complete. And all we've got to do now is just finesse it, reduce it, by that I mean making it smaller, whilst keeping the pattern the same. And I'm going to do that by simply going backwards and forwards with my fingers, working along the bottom edge each time. Occasionally you can turn it on its side if the side's not particularly flat, and I will keep doing that until it's about an inch across each side. So at the moment you can see it's nearly 1.5 inches, but I will keep putting this down and reducing it until it is about 1 inch. So I will speed up through the process and bring you back when I've got that nice and neat. So there we go, I've got the piece finished and down to the right size that I want. So now is the moment of truth where we cut through and see what we've got. And I'm going to cut straight through the middle, because I know I don't need a huge amount for what we're doing for the project today, just so you get the better idea of how the pattern looks. And those are the different looks we get depending on which way you put it together. So for what piece we're doing today, if you want to do just the heart, then I know from experience with the cutters I've got, I only need 10 slices. However, I know a lot of you won't just want to do the heart, you'll want to do other things as well. So I'm going to show you the pattern in its entirety when it goes together in a kaleidoscope. When I finish a new design, I like to put 24 slices together in a good hexagon, because that gives me all the 3 different patterns, and I can then choose which ones I want to pick when I'm doing my individual pieces. Now obviously you don't need to do that, but if I do that for you, it'll give you a rough idea of how yours will go together if you've got something looking similar to mine at this point. And if you haven't, don't worry, it means you've got something unique and wonderful and purely your own, and it will still look fantastic when it's kaleidoscoped. Just go for it, trust me. So what we need to do now is to take some slices. Now when you're taking slices, you can either take them from the back to the front, Some people like to take them from the front to the back. Some people like to do it at one side or the other. Do whichever you find most comfortable. In practice, I normally go from back to the front, but I put my head right over the top of it, which is no good for the camera because obviously you wouldn't see what I'm doing. So I'll try and do a couple of slices for you to the side so you can have a look-see. I'll only do a couple and then I'll take it off screen and do the other 24. When you're slicing, if you're not used to slicing, get yourself some scrap clay if you've got some, put it into a triangular shape and just practice. There is nothing better than just practice, practice, practice when it comes to taking even slices. And even slices are more important than whether they're thin or they're thick at this stage. So whichever you feel comfortable cutting, whatever size you feel comfortable, just cut 10 slices at that particular size. So mine generally end up about that sort of thickness, and I like the triangular canes because generally you can see both sides when you're cutting down. So I'll cut the 24 slices and I will fast forward putting them together in the Kaleidoscope for you. If you want to see it in more detail, I will put a link to my bowl video, which is another free tutorial where I put them together in slow motion, so you can follow that through if it's not something you have done before. So there's our final piece kaleidoscoped and with the pattern all finished. Don't worry about how I finished that all off to get it to that stage, because I'm just about to show you that when we do our piece for our heart pendant. And if you did want to do it just like this, as I say, there is the bowl tutorial which I have put the link to, which will give you all the techniques you need for that. So having got the pattern, I can now get the cutter that I'm planning on using and just roughly hold it over the area to see if there's a pattern that I particularly like given the shape of the cutter. So I know I'm going to go sort of for something effectively down this side, so I'd need 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces to give me effectively that pattern, and then I can take my cutter over there. So having done that, I can put that to one side now. I will probably make something like a bowl out of that. And I've got the last little piece of our 7 grams of the plum. I got it nicely conditioned and put it through on setting number 5. So again, the same similar setting that we used for our little offcuts when we added the sheets into our design. And now all I've got to do is put it together so I get the pattern to match. So I know that I want the bit with the double bobble to go first. So all I'm going to do is put the 2 pieces up and put them together so that the double bobble area in the middle there fits. And then I know I can take this over to that way, fit that together like that, and that will be my 3 pieces together. Now, as I mentioned, I've got this blade that I've made safe by covering it over with masking tape, so I can just put any little areas that weren't quite right there. And I'm going to look and see that the extra piece I want is going to come down here, because this is where the other piece of the pattern is that I'm going to use. And then got that double bobble there, so I know that's going to fit on there, so I can now start my 3 pieces, go on the other side the right way up. If you find it difficult to do 3 pieces at a time, just do 2, and if you'd rather do it whilst they're on the sheet, do that instead. And that's the reason why we use these flexible sheets, so you can actually put them together on the sheet if you would rather do that. So now I should be able to fit those 2 together so they meet. Don't worry about the gaps, so I'm going to show you how to fill those in a second. So now we've got 4 pieces we're going to add around the edge. So I've got a little bit of a curve on there, so I'm just going to straighten those 2 pieces off just to give me a fighting chance of putting our pieces together. and I'm going to match that piece first. So if that piece matches, then I know this piece needs to go in like that. So there's no rush, just take your time. That piece fits together like that, which leaves us the gap for the two pieces here. So same as before, that piece will fit there. So my final piece comes on at the bottom there. And again, fit that piece in. And you can, if you want to, just go in first and say straighten up the bits you've got so that you've got a better chance of fitting these pieces in. And I'm just going to, with my craft knife, just very gently pull this bit down slightly so that I've got a better match between here and here. So all my pieces are now on, but as you can see I've got some quite large gaps in between those pieces, like here, here and here. That's absolutely fine, it's not a problem. All we're going to do is we're going to persuade them to join together. So I'm going to use my cable needle. I'm not using the point, I'm using sort of about this sort of point down here, this area, and just very gently roll it across the top, gently persuading those pieces together until they join. And just work your way over, doing the same with any gaps, and start with the gaps first, the big gaps. If you've got a gap towards a point, then you gently persuade all the pieces up towards the point. And then once you've got all the points done, you can very gently, again not quite using the tip of the needle, just using a bit further down, just smooth together any of the seams. Then with your roller, making sure it's nice and clean, I'm just going to gently roll over the whole piece in all the directions, making sure it's nice and smooth. And now we can see how we're going to fit our piece on. But I want a beveled edge on this, so I'm going to take a little bit of the cling film, stretch that completely flat and taut over the top of your clay. And then when you press down, wherever you press, you will get a beveled edge. So I'm just going to decide which way up and how I want this piece to be. I'm going to press down gently with my fingers just to create a slight indent so that it stays in place, so that when I get the board and press down hard all the way through, it should go through all the way down. But before I remove the cling film, I'm going to take my little heart cutter, put that where I want to put the little Diamante pieces. Let's put it on this side. And just press down just enough to give an indent, not to go all the way through. But again, it gives just a nice beveled edge. Okay, remove the wrap. Remove your excess clay. The other thing to decide on is with your Diamantes, whether or not you want to put them in now before baking, or whether or not you want to put them in after baking. Now the ones I have got are these ones, and they've sort of got an AB sort of backing on them to give them that sort of slight bluey green shine. However, when they've baked, they don't come out as shiny. So I have learnt with these ones not to bake them in situ, so I add them with glue afterwards. So it's a bit of a trial and error with yours. If you've got the pure crystals with no backing on them, they should be absolutely fine. If you were going to bake them in situ, then you would simply get a little bit of your liquid clay, and I would recommend taking a cocktail stick and then just dribbling tiny bits of liquid clay just into the groove of your piece, and then you could gently, with your stick pen, just press them in place. And that's the way I would do that at this stage. However, as I say, because these do not bake well, I'm going to create a groove for them and then put them in after baking. And I'm just going to create a deeper groove that's wide enough to hold the crystals once the piece has been baked, and I will glue them in, as I say, after baking. Of course, if you don't have any crystals or glass things to bake in, if you've just got the plastic crystal type things with the sticky backs and they're flat backed, then you don't need to do this at all. Just give yourself that little indent with the heart cutter so you know the shape, and then you'd leave it completely flat and then just stick them on after the piece is baked. So as you can see there, I've done quite a nice deep incised line, and then I'm going to take the bowl I'm going to bake on, just press that onto the side. I don't want too much of a curve, just a little bit, just to give me an extra dimension. And then I will bake that according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay I am using. I will, as normal, tent my whole piece in foil, but I will make sure it's a brand new piece of foil, and I'm going to put it on in such a way that it curves completely over the top and doesn't touch or embed in any way into the clay. Whilst the piece is baking, I'm going to do a bit of preparation for the second baking that we're going to do. So I want a backing piece that's going to fit on the back side of my pendant. So I've rolled together all the rest of my plum coloured clay, so that will now be our piece to go on the underside. And the next thing to do is to create the bail or the finding, the two little round bits that's going to sit on the back where the chain will hook through. So I'm using a 3mm cable needle, just because it happens to be a good size for what I'm looking for, and I'm going to bend the wire. This is the 3 inches 7.5 centimetres, and it's a 0.6mm piece of wire, and I'm just going to roll or bend that round the needle till we've got a double hook or double loop. With my flat pliers, I'm just going to bend that piece in flat so it's not sticking out. It's not going to catch on anything. And then I'm going to bend this piece flat along the bottom of the cable needle, probably about 1 inch or 2 centimetres, a good width that'll be in the middle of our two top parts of the heart there. And having done that, then just take this piece again and just wrap it round to give us the 2 loops on that side. If you've got excess, you can just take that piece off. Make sure it's nice and straight on the bottom, and then just pop it off, and then that will sit embedded under this piece in the back and give us a nice finding or a nice hook that we can loop our necklace through when we've got our finished piece. Once the piece is baked and cooled, it's time to add the backing. So I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of liquid clay on the back of this, enough to make it sticky and tacky but not slippy. So I'm sort of putting it on but almost sort of pulling it off at the same time. And then your cut out piece will just fit nicely onto the back. And then put the little finding we've made in a position where the hoops are going to be set so they're equally going to come out off the top to give you a nice straight pendant. And I'm just cutting away with my craft knife the clay underneath the finding. So pop that out, pop the finding back in, and you can generally see on the bit of clay where the ends were, so take those bits off so you've got enough left. That's going to sit nicely in the gap. And then with a tool like the cable needle, just roll the clay back in, so it's going to hide the finding nicely, and the only thing you're going to be left with are those little hoops that you can then string whatever you need to hang the pendant on, whether it's a chain or a piece of thread or a beaded string, whatever you want. Make it as neat as you can by pressing down in. So you want to hide all the other wire but just have the two hoops sitting in. At this stage, before I've finessed it, I will normally get something like the piece of chain I mentioned earlier, just to fit that through, put that through, and then you can hang it up in front of you, making any adjustments you need so that it's going to come straight. And then with something like the bit of sponge, you can just press down on just to give a nicely textured and neat back, and add as much or as little texture as you want all the way around. So you can probably just about see it's a very sort of subtle texture on that one. And then either with a craft knife or a polymer clay blade, just gently press in and bevel around the edge, obviously making sure you don't cut your finger. Check on the front, there's no clay showing. You can texture the sides if you want. When I'm happy that it's all finished and there's no bits on the front, I will just pop it in the bottom of a bowl with a slight curve on it, and then cover the top with foil, and again bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay I am using. And when that's done, the last thing to do is put the little Diamantes in and decide the finish we want for our piece. The piece was finished and baked, and when it was cooled, I've just hand sanded and polished this to give it a nice high shine. For anyone who does want to do the hand sanding, I use 240 grit, 600, 1000, 1500 up to 2000 grit. I sand in a bowl of water with a little bit of washing up detergent in it, just to help with the sanding process. And once I finished sanding, I've then just polished it with a soft cotton polishing mop. So the last thing to do is to put our little Diamante pieces in. So I've got my sticks pencil, and I've got some Diamantes to hand, and I take out more of these crystals than I need because only a few of them will be on the bench the right way up. I also have a biodegradable wet wipe to hand, and I have pre-mixed some of my 2-part glue, and what I'm planning to do is just pick up a tiny bit of glue and just add that into the groove. Take your time because you want to be fairly neat with this, and if you can, only get the glue into the groove, but the wet wipe is to hand in case you don't, and if you're not happy with wet wipes, then just a wet cloth, just something to wipe over the piece, would work. When that's done, I will start adding the little crystals in. I'll start at the bottom, work most of the way up one side, then the other side, then come around the top so that I can judge where they're going to meet in the middle, so I don't sort of do all of one side and then find I have gaps on the other side. And it's just a case of taking your time and just popping them in place. And there we go. Those are all our pieces added. So all I've got to do now is leave that to dry and then fit my chain in the back, and our pendant is complete. So here are some different colour options for you. And as you see, they all come out just very slightly different, but sometimes the colours you use also makes them look very different. So this was a blend between cherry red, lavender, white, apple green and brilliant blue, as it gives you that pattern. And again, it's exactly the same, but giving you a slightly different look because of the colours used. And on this one, it was brilliant blue through to aqua, apple green, lemon yellow and orange. And the colours on this one were brilliant blue, calypso blue, tropical green, apple green through into the sunflower yellow. And then this one, which was just a single tone, was using 5 different tones of blue. So the darker blue was actually a mixture of plum and brilliant blue. And then I went to that mixture, which was darker, then brilliant blue, peppermint, aqua and white. And that gives you that effect. So I just wanted to go through some alternate finishes for you. So this was one of the ones I was doing when I was experimenting, and this is the one where I added the Diamantes before I baked with the liquid clay, and you can see there they really have gone quite dull, which is why I decided not to do that with the ones I had from that point on. But I also haven't done anything to the finish of this. It hasn't been sanded, it hasn't been varnished, it is completely as it is, and again it gives quite a nice look, and it's, although they're not particularly shiny, there's a nice contrast between the matte look here and the shine there. And also this is one where I did just put that little hole in the middle there and just added that very small screw eyelet, which you can buy from online stores, and then just added some chain so it gives a look and hangs like that. This one has got the backing that we've done today, and this one the Diamantes were added afterwards, and there was no sanding of this one. I simply varnished it, so that gives you that shiny thing, and I varnished it before I put the Diamante in. And these two are very much the same, but obviously with the different colour designs, and both got the normal bit on the back, and both of these were sanded and polished to give a really nice high shine. And then once I'd sanded and polished, then again I added the Diamantes in with the glue. That's the end of the Crystal Blend Heart Pendant tutorial. It's a nice cane, nice and easy to do, and if you go slightly off-piste and create your own design, then I'm sure it'll look absolutely beautiful too. And the technique of adding and insetting the little point back crystals is quite a nice one to add onto your pieces as well. So you can do lots of different things with this technique, and I really look forward as always to seeing the photos that you post. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Okay, I think that's it. The end of that tutorial. Hopefully I'll see you next time for another one. Bye for now. Bye.